We're now joined in studio by political analyst Professor Susan Booysen and Executive Chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Mr. Terry Tselane. Thank you so much to you both. Terry, perhaps let me start with you. I mean, just some of the things that we're hearing on the ground, as well as one account here by a political party who's saying that, in fact, their name was omitted on the ballot paper. There was some error that, their name either appeared next to another logo or their logo then had a different name attached to it. I mean, some of those excuses we are hearing are very much inexcusable, don't you think? I mean, you are familiar with the operations of the IEC. Speak to us about what this essentially means for this particular party.
Thank you very much for having me. That would be a very serious transgression on the part of the Commission. And like you correctly pointed out, it is something that is inexcusable. Because all the political parties, when they meet all the requirements to participate in the elections, they do that with an expectation that their details will reflect as they have actually been submitted. Now, if there is an error on the part of the Commission, I'm not just too sure how they're going to be dealing with that particular aspect. We have never experienced something like that in the history of our elections. And they're going to have to sit down and see how to deal with that kind of a problem. But it would be a very serious transgression.
Of course, this is the Change Party that was speaking to my colleague Natasha Piri just moments ago. We haven't spoken to the IEC officially, and we'll get their comment, just a little bit later on. But Prof, let me bring you into this conversation. So we know we've been seeing, people turning up to vote, but we know that the numbers are not a reflection of what we saw in 2016 as an example. I mean, we're told, for instance, that we have up to, I think, 12 o'clock noon today, that there were about 3.5 million people who turned up to vote today on the at the polls, and we know that in 2016 by that stage we had between 7 to 10 million people showing up. So these numbers really reflect something along the lines of 2000s. What do we read into this?
Yes, I think this is incredibly serious for the legitimacy of the elections and of the institutions that are being elected. It is not just candidates and political parties that are being elected here. It's the affirmation of institutions and whether the electorate and citizenry more broadly actually trust those institutions to do things differently. We know South Africa is a kind of a protest nation. It's very easy to protest. And we also saw some of the protests happening around the communities today, which are very important. In recent elections, we've increasingly seen that the protests do not cease on the eve of the elections, but they are brought right into the elections because there's people who really believe, probably in other channels of expression, direct action type of expression, and knowing that they can going to grab the attention of media and relevant authorities when they go on a big stage like elections and then protest. And in many ways, you was absolutely spot on when you remarked that we do not get a sense of celebration of elections in this time around. And I think that is very serious because it's in a way it's a tormented type of election. There was COVID, and then there were a few snags and hiccups with the Electoral Commission and organizing it. Political parties' campaigns didn't really want to get traction, and so many micro-parties and independents standing. And one was hoping that the Electoral Commission at least would totally hold it together. But it is not, by several indications, it's not, we don't know how widespread those are, but it's not totally holding it together. And if the voters then come and abstain, abstention of course is a definite political message in there. But that is very much wide repercussions.
Terry, perhaps let me bring you into this. I mean, we know that protests are not new, during this time, particularly as we relate to the local government elections. But these ones seem to be sending out a message, because what we're seeing now is that the people aren't really going to the polls. I mean, we've just seen demonstrations in Johannesburg where they're going to Luthuli House saying that they need houses, and they were promised houses since 1994. Does that necessarily translate to them not going to the polls? And does that also necessarily translate to them saying, this is the change that I'm making? This is the only way I can effect change, by not voting?
Yeah, actually, an organized non-participation in election, it's a vote in itself. Because those people who are saying that they're not going to be participating in the actual casting of a vote, but that they're going to be organized and protest in the manner that they're doing, they're sending out a message to political leaders as well as public representatives to say that they are basically not happy with the kind of services that they're receiving from different communities. And there is no way that any of these public representatives cannot actually take note of those kind of organized formations, especially when it is affecting the voter turnout in a significant way, in a manner that is actually likely to be affecting these elections.
Do you think leaders in any way, Prof, are actually waking up to the fact that the voices of the people, is louder than it was in previous elections?
Yes.
Or do you think this is much of nothing really? Nothing will change really?
No, I really think they are sitting up and taking notes because elections are such an essential part of our political operations, our political system, and the institutions that are being elected are an essential part of government. And this, in effect, could amount to a vote of no confidence, both in the system and in elections and in the leaders. And that is nothing that should give anybody any peace of mind who is involved in this. And it would be a serious wake-up call to those people at local government and councillors to be elected, and bureaucrats who have to cooperate with the councillors to bring things, to deliver things to the people. Serious wake-up call that this is not going to continue. It cannot continue. It's an unbearable future if that is the way it is.
Terry, without preempting, obviously, how everything will pan out come midnight tonight, or essentially when the polls do close at 9 p.m., but do you think some of the developments that we are seeing, some of the concerns that are coming out and directly being put at the, squarely in the path of the IEC will somehow put question to how free and fair these elections actually are?
Absolutely. Look, in terms of the way the legislation is structured, those people who are disaffected by the decision of the Commission or some of the practices of the Commission, they can lodge objections. There is a section in the legislation, we refer to it as Section 65 objection. These are objections material to the outcome of the results of an election. So any disaffected party or individual can raise those issues with the IEC, and the Commission has got a responsibility to deal with that before they announce the results of an election. And then, if the party is not happy with that, some of these issues are actually going to end up in the Electoral Court, because it does not mean that the fact that the Commission has dismissed a petition or an objection, then that's the end of the story. It means a person who has actually lodged that complaint or objection can still go to the Electoral Court and raise those issues. It has happened in Clockwork during just before the 2016 local government elections.
All right, I know that I will definitely be continuing with some of the conversations that we've just had later on throughout the day, particularly as we, just talk about how difficult it has been for people to decide who to vote for this election. We've spoken, at length with various political analysts about coalition parties and independent candidates that are now coming out. So perhaps let's pause for now and then come back a little bit later and just touch on some of those, issues that have been raised significantly during this upcoming elections. But let me thank you both for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Professor Susan Booysen and Executive Chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Terry Tselane.